Walk in the light as he is in the light. This week, I have to be recertified every couple years in what's called crisis intervention training. And this week, we are doing some preliminary work on that. And they sent me a YouTube video called Removed. It's capital R-E and then a capital M, moved. And I mention that because in this video, and if you want to watch it, it's not always easy to watch. It is on YouTube. But it's about a young lady, a young girl, who's in a situation where domestic violence is taking place. And it reveals, in some ways, very clearly, my experience with people who've worked or who've been through traumatic kinds of situations. It reveals her thought processes and how that abuse affects her. It is worth viewing if you can deal with the sadness of what you hear this young woman experiencing. But there's a lot of people out there who've experienced these things. There was a study done a number of years ago called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, the ACEs. And it talked about all the different kinds of people, or the different kinds of trauma that people have gone through. And the number of people who experienced them is incredible. And it talks about the long-term effects of those incidents. It doesn't just go away. You see, what I want you to understand is life's experiences mark us. They change us. Now, often we can get healing through that. Jesus brings healing. But the reality is our life's experiences have a long-term impact upon us. They change us. They afflict and infect how we think of the world. On the positive side, good experiences give us a more hopeful view of the world. Bad experiences give us a darker, more disturbed view of the world and of ourselves and of other people. And that is what I've been saying in the last several weeks as we've talked about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. When they stepped into sin, that action impacted how they viewed everything. Themselves, the world, and God. You know, last week, I talked to you about how it affected us and how we become able to see ourselves differently, as we saw in Ephesians chapter 1. Now, for the next several weeks, I want to talk about and try to reclaim the image of who God is that's been distorted by sin. As I said before, in Genesis, God didn't change when he came back into the garden after the sin. Adam and Eve changed. And so that sin has carried on and impacts all of us day after day, age after age. And so we misunderstand who God is. And honestly, some of what I'm hearing and reading is new to me. I'm trying to see God differently and expand and transform my understanding of who God is. You know, George MacDonald, who I've quoted some, said that there will be days in the future when Christians will be ashamed of the things that they came to believe about God, because they have so misinterpreted and so put their view of the world and their view of things upon God, and have made God unlike who God really is. So again, what I want us to do is I want us to come to understand the truths of God, that we might come to a place that we can walk in the light of God's love and mercy and goodness and feel comfortable coming into his presence. So as we do this today, a couple things that we need to start out. One is anything that we talk about God is at best a metaphor. God is beyond our ability to comprehend. God is beyond our mind's ability to conceive. And so what the scripture readers and writers did, I should say, the scripture writers did, is they used images to help us gain some sense of what God is like. Any one of these are limited. None of them will convey the massiveness of a God who is infinite and majestic beyond our ability to even look at. As the song that we sung earlier said, God is an unapproachable light. He is so bright that our eyes are blinded by who God is. Secondly, not only are we using metaphors, these metaphors are for us to redeem our image of God, that we might think more clearly about God, that we might come to know God better. The purpose here is not some intellectual exercise. Abraham Joshua Heschel, a Jewish theologian, says that God revealed himself in the Old Testament, and we would say in the New Testament too, only through relationships. He didn't give a document and said, here's what I'm like, here's 10 points about who I am. He did it through relationships, because in that interaction, it's just like if you wanted to relate to me. I could tell you about who I am. I'm a pastor, I'm a counselor, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, but none of that really tells you who I am. To get to know me, we have to be in a relationship, and we begin to grow in our knowledge. So the purpose of this is to paint a picture of who God is so that we can begin to relate to Him. And then we would be free to receive the invitation to take the chance and to not be fearful, but to come draw closer to God. That's what this is all about. So as we do that, in the passage I just read to you, in the book of 1 John, the author says, very simply, this is the message that we have heard from Him and declare to you. God is light. And emphatically it says, in Him there is none, no darkness. So God is light. But you know, one of the problems with this image, and I've grown up with this, and this is what I'd often heard. Well, God is so bright and so light and so much that darkness offends Him. And so our darkness pushes us away from God. That is at least how I interpreted it, and many have interpreted it. And that comes out of that sin nature. That comes out of the idea that bad people are going to get bad things. And if you have darkness in you, God's going to push you away. But George MacDonald said, if it be said that God does a thing and the thing seems to be unjust, then either I do not know what the thing is, or God does not do it. When it says God is light, it's not about exclusion, but it's about invitation. It's, darkness is actually a negative. Darkness is the absence of light. Light is the presence. And God is saying, come into the light. Not, you're not good enough to come into the light, or you got to clean up your act before you come into the light. He's saying, come into the light. And as we will see, if we come into the light, we are transformed. It's an invitation to become one who walks in the light with God. In John chapter 1, where it talks about the Word became flesh, it says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness doesn't overcome the light. The light drives out the darkness. This is where the metaphor comes in. Think about it. Wherever you bring the light, the darkness dispels. It's not like the darkness comes in and smothers the light. That's why they use this metaphor of light. We have to understand God possesses none of those elements, none of those characteristics that we describe as darkness. God can't be unloving and can't be unkind or unmerciful or ungenerous. He is always just. He is always kind. He is always merciful because He is the light. There's a reason why we think of the deeds of darkness and the deeds of the light. The deeds of darkness convey a sense of evil. And God is light, and he does what is good. And so the purpose of this, when we start talking about God is light, it's with the purpose of bringing purity. And not just purity because God is pure, but purity so that we might become pure. It says later in verse 7, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus purifies us from all sin. In 2 Samuel, it says, you, Lord, are my lamp. The Lord turns my darkness into light. Do you hear that? God takes our darkness, and he doesn't say it's terrible or we reject you because of your darkness, but I turned it into your light. Similarly, in Ephesians chapter 5, it says, you once were darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Later in that passage, it literally says that God transforms our darkness into light. He can take that which was evil, that which was destructive, that which was dark. He can help transform those experiences that cause us to look at God in a negative way and see him in the right way, or a more true way. And along with that, light and God as light reveals truth. We talk about truth as being, he came into the light, he woke up, he recognized it. Because truth is revealing. And light reveals the truth of things. You know, many of you know that I like to play golf in the morning. This fall, this darkness has come later. Or light has come later, I should say. There's been some mornings I've had to start where it was dusk. And you just couldn't see much of anything. But then the sun comes up and all of a sudden you begin to see everything clearer. All of a sudden the colors, instead of gray and black, now you see the brightness of the colors. You see, light reveals. It shows us the truth. In 2 Corinthians 4, it says, for God, who said, let the light shine in the darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. We see the light, the knowledge of God's glory. Along with purity and truth, the light shows us beauty. As I said, in the morning when the sun comes up, all of a sudden the flowers come alive. The yellows and the greens and the blue all become visible. God created a beautiful world. He creates it so that we can see the beauty. We can see the beauty of him, and we can see the beauty in the world. And think about it. God didn't have to make the world beautiful. He didn't have to give us a sense of aesthetics and understanding of beauty. But he did because he wanted us to enjoy and appreciate and know the beauty of the world. But also, when we think of God and we think of light, we should think of beauty. George MacDonald says, is to fear the light is to be untrue, or at least comes to an untruth. No being for himself or for another needs fear the light of God. Nothing can be in the light that is against our nature, which is of God, or to anything in us that is worthy. All fear of the light, all dread lest there should be something dangerous in it, comes of the darkness still on those who do not love the truth with all their hearts. If we think that God's revealing light is a bad thing, it's because the darkness, those experiences I talked about at the beginning, continue to hold sway over us. But God's light and God is beautiful, and he wants us as best we can to see his beauty. He says that, or 1 Peter says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. And one more thing. So there is purity. and there is truth, and there is beauty. And in the light is life. Again, if we think of the metaphor, light brings life to the trees and the plants. It actually brings life to us. There is healing and strength in the sunlight that we receive. But in the gospel, it says the light was the light of men. Let me say that again. I think I said it wrong. The light was the life of men. So the light is life-giving. Psalm 56 says, "For you've delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life." The life which I have now spoken became the light to men, in the appearing of him in whom it came into being. The life became the light that men might see it. Shine the light so we might see the life that Jesus wants to give us. That was George MacDonald. As we said, one other thing I will say. As 1 Timothy said, as our song, "Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light unapproachable, hid from our eyes." God's light blinds us, not in fear, but in the beauty and the wonder of it. It's like trying to look directly at the sun. It's not that the sun is evil, but it is brighter than our eyes can take it. God is brighter than all of that. But the invitation is what I want us to pay attention to. God is incredible. God drives away our darkness. He's willing to drive any of our ways away. Any of our darkness away. So, we come and we recognize in God there is no darkness. But that's an invitation to walk in the light, to find purity and beauty and truth and life. So the invitation for all of us comes in this passage again. But if we walk in the light as he is in light, the darkness is driven away. We come to see the truth and the beauty and the wonder of who God is. So yes, our life experiences tell us to not trust. But God says, I am light. It is beautiful, life-giving, truth-revealing, purity-giving. So walk in the light with me is God's invitation. Our next song invites this very thing. Shine, Jesus, shine.